Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for coming along. I know you've all got lots of other things to do on the ship, but thanks for coming along to this presentation. Morag and I started off with the joint presentation, basically saying how we ended up onto this road less travelled. And my first presentation, solo presentation, was about the duties of a patrol officer. And now I'm going to go through the actual practicalities, things that I actually physically did. Everything that you see here are photographs that I've taken, and there's one or two reminiscences in here that are actual first-hand conversations I've had with other patrol officers. So everything you see here is absolutely true and factual. Patrolling in the jungles, there were no road, well, very, very few roads in Papua New Guinea. And as I said before, it was the second largest island in the world. It's 5-6 times bigger than the UK, and we had to walk everywhere that we went. Fly into an airstrip, jump on a canoe or whatever, and off we would go. When we went out, this is just a general patrol here. We went and we took anywhere between 20 and 100 carriers to carry our gear in these galvanised iron boxes that we took everything along. So when we planned for a patrol, it could be, it was an unwritten rule that we had to be out on patrol for at least 15 days a month. And my longest patrol was 70 days that I was out on by myself. So we had to work out exactly how much provisions and everything that we took. We could get local vegetables and the like in the villages, buy the odd chicken every now and then, and supplement our diet with other bits and pieces, snake, possum, bats, other bits and pieces. But this is what we generally took along with us. There were tins of corned beef, tins of luncheon meat. Any Australians in the audience possibly can remember Tom Piper sausage and vegetables. That was a can of vegetables with one sausage in it, and we'd boil up some rice and heat up this sausage and vegetables, and we'd have that for tea when we got into the village. When we went into the village, there was always a house that was set aside for the patrol officer. And that was used by other visitors. Sometimes it would be medical orderlies would go in, or perhaps occasionally there was an agricultural advisor would go in there. But there was the patrol officer's house. There was usually a little kitchen off to one side. We didn't want the patrol officer's house to burn down when the kitchen went on fire. And there was usually a little house for any accompanying policemen or council clerks or anybody else that was actually on the patrol with us. But this is the sort of food that I took along with me, and obviously if it was a long patrol we had to make sure that all the tins were spread out over the different patrol boxes. We took these Coleman lamps with us. So with a Coleman lamp you had to take the kerosene as well. Most important thing though were the mantles. If you've ever used one of these lamps, you actually attach a mantle it's made of silk, and you pressurise the lamp, set fire to the silk mantle with a bit of methylated spirits, turn it on, and the mantle blows out to provide, basically it's like a globe, but that is burnt silk, very, very fragile. So you can imagine we had to make sure we took plenty of mantles with us, because going on patrol, if your lamp's in one of those boxes and it gets dropped, the likelihood is that the mantle would just disintegrate, and we'd have to put on a new one. So obviously you took plenty with you, because you just didn't want to spend all of your night in the dark. The boxes, these boxes are being carried on poles. Each two carriers, they'd go off and they'd cut down a sapling and make up the poles. And when we got to the house, they would use the poles that are used for carrying the boxes And that's just what they call a stretcher bed or a bed sail. It's made out of sail canvas. And they just put it through this A-frame, tie it down, and that's what we would sleep on during the night. Obviously, it was dead easy to take down in the morning, fold up, pop it in one of the boxes, and away we went. But sometimes you would be spending a lot longer in one of these patrol posts or patrol officers' houses, and in the mountains it became really, really cold. So what we would do is we would stuff the inside of the loop with grass, and at night time, just before, probably half an hour before I went to bed, I would get the trusty primer stove and put it underneath the bed sail, lit, and the heat of that would actually warm up the grass, and I'd turn off the primus, put that away, and jump into a nice warm bed. And that would last me for the evening. So I was, no quilts, no doing, it was just a mosquito net, pair of sheets, and some nice warm mattress. But when we got to wherever we were going, we were obviously, generally we walked for anywhere between 6 and 13 hours in a day to get from one village to the next. 13 hours was the longest walk that I ever did. But on average, it's about 8 hours between villages. So when we get to the village, it's kind of, you're kind of damp, your clothes are saturated. So the first thing you do is light a fire, get the bucket on the fire, and have a shower from a shower bucket. Now the little nozzle down the bottom there opened up, so you'd wet yourself, close it down, soap up, open it up, rinse off, close it, and you take the 5 gallons to do that. Now in Australia, when the droughts are on, we are very, very used to 3-minute showers, having gone through this little episode here. Occasionally we'd be luxurious, and we'd have 2 of them. So we get my domestic servant or houseboy was with me, cook boy, and he'd already have a second bucket of hot water on the fire, and we just drop that down, fill it up, and you could have a luxurious 10-minute shower. But this is the sort of terrain that we would patrol through. The picture on the left is, you see movies of people on patrol in the jungles, and they're slashing away with bush knives and cutting tracks and everything. That doesn't happen, because most of these tracks are the well-worn tracks between the villages. And with the way the canopy is in the jungle, there's very little grows down on the floor of the jungle anyway. So it's nice and clear and open for walking in. But occasionally we'd come across a really beautiful waterfall here, and if we were feeling a bit like a rest, we'd strip off, jump under this ice cold water, have a quick shower, get dressed again, and then take off onto the village. But this is the sort of open savanna area. This grass that you can see here is called kunai grass, and it's very, very tall, very sharp. And if you actually walk through the grass itself, it just cut your legs to pieces. So this was where you can see that the track itself is quite well worn. But up in the distance there is the patrol post that we were heading off to on an election patrol. When we moved from place to place, we would recruit our carriers from the village that we were stayed in overnight, and we're going to the next village. So we had, as I say, it's about 8 hours between villages. So roughly 4 hours from the village we were in, we would walk to the boundary between the 2 villages and stop there and wait until the villagers came from the village we were going to come and pick up our gear to take it back to their village. Mainly because there was generally rivalry between the 2 villages, and you didn't want to just walk into a village with a whole bunch of people from some foreign area, basically, and that really caused problems. So what you had to do is sit there and wait until the other people turned up. Because if you paid the carriers straight away and they took off, and the other lot didn't turn up, you could be sitting out in the middle of the jungle twiddling your thumbs for quite some time. So that's what we were doing in this particular photograph, is actually changing over the carriers. But occasionally we'd actually go on patrol in canoes, and as you can see, it's an idyllic situation here. This is in the Ramu River, or tributary of the Ramu River. Beautiful spot, really easy. Most of the canoes were man-powered rather than with outboard motors, but you had to obviously look out for crocodiles in this particular area. And this is the village that we were going into, and global warming is going to have a major impact on this sort of place in Papua New Guinea. You only need the river to go up, obviously, another 30 centimetres, and it'll be inundated. But this is the sort of major river area. To get from the bottom right hand of the picture to the centre left by walking, it would probably take you 5 days, because it's just absolutely, totally thick of sago palms. And sago palms, you just can't walk through them. They're impossible. So you have to go by canoe, and to get from the bottom right to the centre left, it would probably take maybe an hour and a half to actually paddle your way round to get to the other side there. So that's the sort of river terrain that we went through. We had some workplace hazards. They comprised from the smallest leeches everywhere we went, to the largest with the crocodiles. Now, when it came to crocodiles, this is a sort of river that we were crossing, and a lot of these crocodiles are actually maybe 300 kilometres inland, upstream from the coast. So they're still pretty dangerous creatures. There's the patrol coming across the river there, and I'm obviously over the other side already, but I would send the dog in first, tell him to go, and he'd swim across to the other side of the river and stand there and patiently wait for me. So we in this particular area, we went to the village and were talking about where we'd come from through. And every time I went on patrol, I used to take a box of 12-gauge shotgun cartridges. Every village was allowed to have one single-barrel shotgun, and they was generally used for hunting pigs or birds of paradise or whatever. And I would take a box of SG cartridges. Now, SG cartridges are the ones with about 8 steel ball bearings in them that are used for shooting large game like large wallabies or pigs. And we were told by the people in the village that we went to that there was this 12-foot long crocodile that was sunning itself on the banks of the river as we crossed it. And I said, "No, I don't believe you. Prove it to me." I gave them 2 SG cartridges, and I said, "If there's a crocodile there, show it to me when I come back." So we took off, went to the next village. We were conducting a census and a by-election in the next village. So we went down. 3 days later, we came back to that village, and I'd totally forgotten about this business about the crocodile. And I was sitting there having a cup of tea after we'd arrived, and these 2 guys turned up into the house, and they just unrolled this 12-foot long crocodile skin in front of me. And the tail of the thing was just obliterated with... The tail of the crocodile is the most dangerous part, according to them. They're not worried about the head. That can bite you and you're done. But the tail knocks you off and can wound you. So they actually shot the crocodile in the tail first and then shot it in the head. But having proved to me that they've got crocodiles in this particular area, I decided that, well, okay guys, let's try and set up a crocodile farm like they had in the north of the island. This was on the south of the island. And when 2007, when we were up there, I heard that they had actually established a bit of a crocodile farm in this particular area. But we were there. This is the Ramu River. It's probably the 4th largest river in the country. But as you can see, the depth of the bank there, and the patrol officer's house is way up there in the corner top of the image there. I like to take note of not the metal canoe in the foreground, but just behind it there's the wooden logs there. They're just a tree that's carved out, and you can see the general shape of them. There's no outriggers, and there's just balance that kept you in the canoe. And you can see the edges of them, and I'll talk about the edges of those canoes in a second. But in this particular area, we're maybe 400 kilometres upstream from the sea, and in the river there, when a saltwater fish becomes used to freshwater and stays and breeds in freshwater, the term they use is euryhaline. And in this particular area, they had bull sharks that had been saltwater sharks, but now lived in the freshwater, and sawfish, you know, with the big bill and the teeth, looked like teeth sticking out the side. Well, I saw one, and a bill, maybe just short of 2 meters tall, in one of the houses there. Huge fish that they were catching in this particular area. But all of these, because it's so flat, when in the wet season, the river comes right up to the top of the bank there, but it also overflows and creates these lakes. And these lakes are only maybe 45 centimetres deep, but they're huge, and they're full of fish and ducks and turtles and everything else, and the water lilies. This is at the end of the water lily season, and the local people would go in and they would harvest the bulbs, and they're a bit like an onion, and they would harvest the bulbs and eat them. And we went into the Kaminimung Lakes for a look, and we just paddled in on one of the tributaries from the Ramu River. And I was on a by-election patrol here. It wasn't my area. I didn't normally patrol in this area. And one of the other patrol officers that we met had said that he'd been in this particular location patrolling extensively. And he told me that one day he'd been going through this. I say it's only very shallow water, but he was meeting a canoe, and it's one of the wooden canoes, and he was wearing his boots to go through this shallow water. And eventually they met up with the canoe and decided that, no, we'll get in this and make a bit of headway. So the edge of the canoe was maybe a metre above his hip. So he threw his left leg into the canoe and held onto the edge of the canoe and pushed down to actually get his right leg into the canoe. And when he did that, his left leg's foot slipped on the bottom of the canoe, and these rubber-soled boots slipped forward, and he actually fell onto the canoe with one leg in and one leg out. And it hurt. And it hurt quite a bit. So he ended up sitting down in the canoe, taking some big deep breaths, and then he looked down at his inside of his right thigh, and there was blood pouring down his leg. And he thought to himself, oh, I've castrated myself. Quick, let's get paddling. But he very quickly dropped his shorts and undies to have a look at the damage. But what had happened was a large leech had gone up his leg, up his trouser leg, into his crotch, and it had just filled up with blood. And as he went down the side of the canoe, it popped, and all this blood just went down his leg. He just fell there. But that patrol officer, from that day onwards, when he got back to the patrol post, when they ring up and order their supplies and everything like that, he was straight on to the chemist and he said, send me a dozen condoms. Because he started to take a condom on patrol with him every time he went out into the swamp areas where the leeches were. There's one place he definitely didn't want a leech to get attached to. So he'd do that. But these are the sorts of dangers that we had in this particular area. But it was a Sunday, we had a day off there, so we went out onto the Canary Lakes, and we've got freshwater turtles, we've got ducks, we've got fish, a whole pile of other bits and pieces that we caught on that particular Sunday, and it was a really pleasant day. One of the other aspects, something that you probably, it just didn't dawn on me, but scrub typhus was an illness that we could get quite easily, and that's transmitted through fleas. And this gentleman here, he's a leper. He's got no fingers, no toes, and leprosy was quite common in that area. But he was quite happy to show off his lost appendages. But in this particular area that we went into, we'd been into, this is the patrol officer's house, and the last patrol I went into there, it was chock-a-block full of chickens and thousands, millions of fleas as well. So I said to the councillor, the leader of the village, I said, look, clear up, get the chickens out of there. Once the chickens are out, then the fleas will probably go. And I don't really want to spend all night scratching. My legs were red raw with it being eaten by these fleas. And when we went there, he hadn't done anything about it. So the easiest thing to do is to burn it down and say, okay, when we come back the next time, we want a nice new house with no fleas or chickens. So that's the sort of thing that we had to do. Oh, like down there on the left there, you see the guy, he's carrying a stick of sugar cane over his shoulder. So they just munch on those as they go on patrol. But on the sea, we would go on, that's the MV Coral that Morag talked about in the last presentation. We had to do things like land courts where there was land disputes. There was a land judge who specialised in land disputes, and we would have to go and meet with him on the location, and he would sleep on the canoe and we would sleep in the patrol officer's hut. But to get from the mainland to the major islands off the coast, we usually went on that to get there. You just didn't want to go over in a 12-foot tinny and get lost or run out of fuel. But this is the sort of terrain that we had to cover. Obviously that bridge didn't last too long. The next flood that came down the river, it disappeared. So they just cut down a few more trees and build another bridge. That guy that's on the bridge at the moment, he's carrying a stainless steel milking bucket. How on earth it ended up where I was, I've got no idea. But when I saw it, I thought, I'll grab that. That looks an attractive item. But we would divvy out the gear that had to be carried to different people. And obviously, you couldn't put one of those buckets inside a patrol box. But when I showed you the duty statements earlier, we had to go on what we call special patrols. And this particular patrol, it was a very quick 3-day dash, basically. This is Sidor. Morag showed you the map of Sidor, but this is a wartime map, World War II map of Sidor and the area, the defences for Sidor, and other bits and pieces. But I was sitting in the office, as I showed you before. We had to do some basic clerical work. We had to fill out reports. We had to do all the other tasks like banking and post office and other bits and pieces. And I was sitting in the office this day, working away, minding my own business, and one of the councillors came in, and he had one of those string bags, a Billams string bag, and he came in and he said, "Oh, hi, Kiap, I'd like to speak to you. I found something." I said, "Oh, okay, whatever, come on." And he just brought this bag and he dropped it on my table, and a big thud. I thought, what on earth have you got in there? Opened it up, and sure enough, there's 2 mortar bombs, this big. So I said to him in terms that he could understand and that I could express to please take these away in a hurry. And we took them to the other side of the airstrip near the office and put them safe so that nobody else could handle them. And I said, why did you bring those? He said, oh, we're building a garden. Want to build a new garden. And we found these things. And obviously, they belong to you. They don't belong to us. So we said, okay. I went to see the boss and said, they found these mortar bombs. And he said, you better go out and find out if there's any more. So there's side door here where those blue arrows are. The red cross is where these mortar bombs were found. If you can see roughly on the map there, there's 3 red dotted lines that go from one side to the other. Now they're the retreat of the Japanese. So the Americans had set up these mortar sites way up in the hills here to cover the retreat of the Japanese. So it took me from Sidor, I was able to drive down the road to the Catholic mission, and then we had to walk inland. So it took me a day and a half to get to where that red cross is. And when I arrived, he took me out to the site, and there were 6 mortar bomb positions, both heavy and light mortars. And there were stacks, maybe a metre deep, of mortar bombs there that had just been left. They were never ever used, and these guys were just about ready to set fire to the grass to make their gardens, and all of these bombs would have gone off. So it took me a day and a half to get there, and it took me about 12 hours to get back, and to radio into the military in Port Moresby to send over the bomb disposal team. And they came in 2 weeks later, and we were sitting in the office inside or when they actually detonated all these mortar bombs, and you could hear them quite easily from there. And as I say, that's a day and a half's travel from Sidor. But also in this particular area, there's lots of World War II wreckage, Betsy bombers and the like. That's never going to fly again. But you can see there's a pawpaw trees grown right up through the inside of the aircraft. Well, that's one of the things I used to do as well. I'd actually gather up a whole pile of seeds, pawpaw seeds, and when I was on patrol, as we walked down the track, I find a suitable place, I just throw a handful of these pawpaw seeds down so that the next time somebody came walking along there, there'd be some nice fresh pawpaw for them to eat. A little bit like Johnny Appleseed, I suppose. But this is a typical patrol. These guys here are from the Basavi area, and they used to carry their own food with them as well. They'd stuff a bamboo pole full of vegetables, and when they got to wherever they were going, they just throw these on the fire. The bamboo doesn't burn very easily, and it would just cook all of these vegetables inside the bamboo pole, so they had their packed lunch with them. But when we got to the villages that we were staying at, we would either have carriers that were kept with us all the time, or policemen, or possibly a medical orderly or whatever, and we had to buy food for them, to feed them. So we would actually buy a whole pile of vegetables. There's plantain bananas there, cabbage, and there's some really nice leafy vegetables. They taste great. And there's a thing called pit, which is like a bamboo shoots. And then this particular area, we were there in 1973, and they were first contacted in 1963. So they still had only 10 years of connection with white people, and they were still being paid for these vegetables with salt. And there's a policeman there, and he's handing over the salt. These people live in that size house. You can anywhere between 150 and 300 people would be living in that house. And another presentation, I'll tell you a lot more about how that house is built and where they build it and how they go about doing it. But this is, Morag mentioned the other day about the Spanish film crew coming in, so they wanted to get some authentic footage of a patrol. that little bit at the very beginning was in our back garden. We had a little clump of trees and some leaves and things like that, so we walked round and round and round there about 10 times so they could get all these footage from different angles, and they took it off back to Spain. But there's the carriers coming down the mountain edge. You can see them coming to the river. Now, this is in the dry season, so the river itself is actually quite shallow, and it's a lot easier and quicker for the carriers to walk across the river than it is to go on that cane bridge you can see up on the left. However, there were people on the patrol that were scared of the river, and the people on the patrol that didn't want to get their feet wet. So they would actually go on to the cane bridge and walk across the cane bridge. One of the people that was on the patrol was my council clerk, and a couple of others on the patrol had never been in this area before, and they were coastal people and never gone across a cane bridge anyway. So they were quite scared about going across this cane bridge. But the council clerk was a Highlander, and he decided to have a bit of fun with them. And as they came across the bridge here, you can see them across the bridge, he got across before everybody else, and you can just see him on the left-hand side here. He decides to give those people that are wandering around behind him a bit of a hurry up. So he decided that he would just bounce up and down on the end of the bridge there. So that's quite an interesting situation when the bridge that you're on is actually moving about 2 feet. But the longest patrol I went on was 70 days, and this is up into Tep Tep, and this was a big patrol we came through. And this airstrip you can see here, if there's any engineers or people know anything about percentages of roads and things, the airstrip was at 15%. So when you actually touched down on the threshold to land, and you actually had to open the throttle to drive up the hill to get to the top. This is my assistant patrol officer here. But this is the size of the patrol that we had to go to this particular area. But after we'd spent a bit of time there, we had to go, obviously, to move on to the next one. So about halfway through the patrol, and we're on a walking track here. You can see the banana leaves in the front. So there's the village set way down below there, and they would actually protect the back of the village with bougainvillea, and Australians would know there's a whiter wild vine which has got hooks on it that if it catches your clothes or your skin you just can't get away from it. Well, they protect the back area of there, so there was only one way in and one way out of the village. But when we left Tep Tep, where the airstrip was, we went up to a walking track that was over 10,000 feet high. Now we're up there, we're above the clouds are above the village, and that's the village of Bamboo that we're heading down to get in there. So that's the sort of terrain that we moved around on. But to show you, give you an example of what the local people had to do, if you see this clearing in the centre there, there's a large building to the left, a large building on the left-hand side there. Well, that's what the large building is. It's the church. So they would actually carry, this is all sawn timber, corrugated iron, everything that was there, the nails and everything to build that church had to be brought from the coast up into that village, which was a 4-day walk away. So these people were desperate to have their church, and they carried all those materials up into there. I'd spent 4 days to get to the village to do the work that I was there doing anyway. But that, I'll give you it down there, see it on the left there. When we got up in the morning to move on to the next village, we'd actually shout out, and that's the next village we were going to, way up there in the top left. And we'd say, hey, we'll be there in 6 hours, put the kettle on, we'll see you. So we had to leave this village and go down, way down into the ravine, across this little bridge at the bottom of the ravine. It took 2 hours to get down to there. And then it was another 4 hours to come back up the mountain, and then along this path here, you can see the path going up that ridge up to the village up there. But they had on the ridge on the back of the image, you can see some white areas. That's where they had their food gardens, and they had an earthquake, and the food gardens just slipped away totally. It was just limestone underneath. So it's kind of perilous living in those environments. And as I said before, way before, 850 different languages in Papua New Guinea. The people in this village here had a different language to the people on that ridge up the top there. And again, as I say, these are the sorts of cane bridges. That's cane, it's a natural cane made, it grows up to maybe 500 feet long, and there's different thicknesses that they make these bridges out of. But we mentioned before that our first posting was in Bogia. This is the very first place that I went on patrol, and onto Manham Island. This is a volcanic island. It's about 6,000 feet tall, and as you can see, it's active. It's still active. And in 1999, it blew out. Probably a third of the top of the volcano blew out on the most major eruption, but they've had eruptions there in 2015, 2018, and 2019. But we used to go across on this little workboat, ferrocement workboat, and these are just the little beaches that were available for us to land on. Now I, being a smarty, decided that I was going to bring 20th century technology into patrolling. I was going to spend a week patrolling around this island, which is what it took you to visit each village. I was going to do it in a day. So we're on this workboat, and you've all been on tenders. This is the tender off our workboat. And these two guys here were with the education department. So this boat's crew at the front there with the paddle, I decided I was going to take a motorbike with me. Now this isn't me, but this is the type of motorbike that we had. This is the type of motorbike that Morag said she burnt a leg on the exhaust pipe. You can see where it is at the front there, so a leg just jammed tight onto that. But I took that motorbike with me, filled it up, and when the boat was at the quay, it was dead easy to put the motorbike onto the workboat, but we had to put it onto this to take it ashore. So there's the boat's crew paddling away. I'm standing in the back of the dinghy, holding onto the motorbike. And as we came in front of the workboat, obviously it was being sheltered by the boat, but when we got in front of it, the wave just hit the dinghy, rocked it about a bit, and I fell backwards. I fell into the sea, but my legs and knees were inside the dinghy. The back of my knees were around the edges of the dinghy, and the motorbike was on top of my legs. The petrol tank was underneath the seat of the motorbike, and there was all this petrol pouring down on top of my face as I was gurgling underneath the salt water. This guy at the front grabbed the motorbike, pulled it out of the way, grabbed my shirt and dragged me into the dinghy and paddled really quickly to shore. We eventually got to shore, got the motorbike off the dinghy. I was sopping wet, lost everything that was in my pockets, disappeared. I eventually got the motorbike started, and I thought, off we go. So I went round and visited these various villages, and we got to the second last village, and I was met by this sight. Now, the guy at the back is the villager, the bloke at the front is a little Sepik school teacher, and the villager had been out in his canoe, and he got 4 number 7 hooks and bound them together to make like a grappling iron. And he just paddled across the top of the reef, just bringing this fishing line behind him. And he jagged this groper in the gill and opened the gill of the groper, and it obviously had to come up to the surface to breathe. And he very gingerly brought this groper, that weighed about 180 kilos, onto shore. Now in this particular area, all the villages, they grow everything, but they have to give everything they fish for, everything they grow, everything they hunt for, they have to give it to the village chief first. He takes what he wants and gives it back to the person that's there. That's just the way that system works on that island. And remember, it's a volcanic island shaped like that. This guy at the back there was quite tall for a local, so he had to go into the village first. So he turned around and started walking uphill with this fish, and the fish slid down the pole, and the little sea-pick teacher's head just disappeared inside the... I wish I'd been able to take lots and lots of photographs of this happening. It was just the funniest thing. It actually took my mind off nearly drowning in the canoe. That's just a little something that happened on that island. But these are the sorts of nice, neat villages that we have on the coast. The Highlands are a totally different ball game. But we would go off on election patrols. This is where we're on a very large canoe. And there's the red boxes are the ballot boxes, as I explained the other day when I was talking about the duties. But this will give you an idea of the size of some of these canoes that are on this river. They're huge. Down on the coast, not really. This is in the Basavi area. But we had to be very, very careful when we were on patrol, crossing these creeks and everything, because we had no idea what the weather was like further away. It could be 50, 60 miles away. There might be a major thunderstorm. And if there'd been a lot of water in the further up in the hills, we had to be mindful of what we were doing when we were crossing these streams, keep an ear open for rushing water, because quite easily you could end up being washed over this major waterfall there. But when I was on patrol, I took my trusty dog with me, and I only ever saw 2 snakes when I was on patrol, because he was always way up front, and he would be making so much noise and racket that the snakes would just disappear. Unfortunately for me, he was a very good pig dog, and he used to disappear into the bush, and every so often you hear all this squealing and everything, and he'd proudly come out of the bush with this piglet in his mouth and drop it at my feet and say, "Am I good? See what I brought you?" And that would then cost me another 5 kina in compensation for the piglet that he killed. But when we're on patrol, we always wore boots. The policemen generally wore boots in the village, but when they were patrolling, they took their boots off. And so this was us. Every time we got there, we'd put the boots out to dry, so they were nice and dry for the following day when we took off. Now, in Papua New Guinea, they were still using stone axes to cut down trees. And your average Papua New Guinea is maybe, 5'2"-ish. And to get the best purchase to cut down a tree, they cut the tree at their chest height, because they need the energy, the strength from that height to actually cut down the trees. They didn't cut them down at the base, like we do with chainsaws and the like. So they would cut down all these trees at this, probably about this height. This is my dog in action. His name is Pran, which is Pidgin English for friend. When we're on this particular patrol, the dog took off down the track. And the next thing that happened, you hear this squealing. He's found another pig, but there was no piglets, just a big pig. And so he decided to bring the whole pig back to me. So he's chasing this pig down the track, and all the carriers and the policemen had taken their boots off. As soon as they saw this pig coming, first thing they did was drop everything and go up the nearest tree. Now in this jungle area here, the tree trunks are all very, very slippery. And so they all went up the trees because they could get hold good grip with their feet, but not me. I had my boots on. There's no way I could get up this tree. But next to me was a large tree trunk, So I hid behind this, hoping the pig didn't see me, but it did. So the pig headed for me, the dog's chasing the pig, I'm running around this tree, the pig's behind me, the dog's behind the pig. So the three of us are running around and around this tree. I yelled on the dog to stop. I ran past the dog and he grabbed the pig by the back of the neck and held it fast. And I took off down the track. And I got down the track maybe 70, 80 metres down the track, and all the carriers and the policemen, they just fell out of the trees like confetti. Grabbed all the gear and they followed me down the track. Gave the dog a whistle, and the dog just went like that and broke this pig's neck, and off he came down, feeling pleased as punch. The village that we just left had heard all this commotion, and they sent people out. We were probably maybe half an hour's walk out of this village already. So we went off to the village we were going to, did the work we needed to do, stayed overnight, and then came back to the same village that we left. And this is what we found when we got there. The locals from that village had come down wondering what the commotion was. They found the dead pig, and they prepared it ready for the carriers and the policemen and us when we came back to that village. And we had a nice feed of fresh pork there. But they're the sorts of things that we got up to as patrol officers. But it was always great to come back home and do the husbandly duties like changing nappies and other things like that. So that's our wee boy in Como when we got back there. In a couple of days' time, Morag will be making her final presentation, and I encourage you to come along and have a listen, because there's some really interesting, funny stuff in there. But thank you very much indeed for coming along anyway.